Luis Garavito. The name sends shivers down the spines of many in Colombia. He preyed on young boys, often street children or those from impoverished backgrounds. Garavito earned chilling nicknames like La Bestia, the Beast, and the Monster of the Andes. His reign of terror lasted for years, leaving a trail of grief and fear across Colombia. His story forces us to confront the societal issues that can allow such horrors to occur. Luis Garavito confessed to the murders of 147 boys. Authorities believe the true number may be much higher. He operated in over 11 different departments, making his capture incredibly difficult. Garavito's modus operandi was chillingly consistent, gaining the trust of his victims by posing as a beggar, monk, or street vendor. He lured them with food, money, or the promise of work, leading them to secluded areas where he tortured and murdered them. The impact of Garavito's crimes on Colombia was profound, creating a climate of fear and exposing societal issues like poverty and child exploitation. Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos was born on January 25, 1957, in Genova, Quindio, Colombia. His childhood was marked by poverty, violence, and instability. His family moved frequently, disrupting his education and contributing to his growing sense of isolation. Garavito's home life was chaotic and abusive, with a father who was a known alcoholic and subjected his children to frequent beatings. His mother was unable to protect her children from her husband's violence. These early experiences played a significant role in shaping his psyche. The constant abuse at home took a severe toll on young Luis. He became withdrawn and introverted, struggling to form meaningful relationships with his peers. Garavito later revealed that he had been sexually abused by 2 different men during his childhood. These horrific experiences left deep psychological scars, instilling in him a sense of worthlessness and rage. Experts believe that these early experiences played a significant role in shaping his psyche. The violence, neglect, and sexual abuse he suffered warped his sense of normalcy. While Garavito's childhood provides a context for his crimes, it does not excuse them. Many individuals endure horrific childhoods without becoming murderers. Garavito's case involved a complex interplay of factors, including his personal history, psychological predispositions, and societal circumstances. Mental health professionals believe he exhibits traits of several personality disorders, including antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and sadism. He displayed a callous disregard for others, lacking empathy and remorse, and derived pleasure from inflicting pain and suffering. His actions demonstrate a chilling level of premeditation and a complete absence of empathy for his victims. Luis Garavito approached his crimes with a level of calculation and precision that is both chilling and bewildering. He meticulously planned each attack, scouting potential locations and victims. His preferred settings were secluded areas where he could carry out his heinous acts without the risk of being caught. Garavito's process began long before the actual encounter with his victim, identifying his target and devising a persona to gain their trust. He was patient and persuasive, ensuring that the boys felt safe enough to follow him to isolated locations. His methodical nature made him one of the most elusive serial killers, leaving a trail of heartbreak and confusion in his wake. The true horror of Luis Garavito's crimes lies not just in the act of murder, but in the prolonged suffering he inflicted upon his victims. His attacks were marked by extreme brutality and sadistic rituals. Garavito would tie up his victims, rendering them helpless and heightening their terror. His torture sessions were methodically executed and often lasted for hours, using a variety of tools to inflict maximum pain. The physical torture often escalated to sexual assault, deriving immense pleasure from dominating and violating his victims. The level of brutality and the ritualistic nature of his crimes highlight the depth of his depravity and the sheer horror his victims endured. One of the most striking aspects of Luis Garavito's criminal behavior was the consistency in his methods and the distinct patterns and signatures he left behind. Garavito's choice of victims was consistent, young boys, often from marginalized backgrounds. His method of gaining their trust through various disguises and lures was also a repeated element in his crimes. Garavito would meticulously tie up his victims, ensuring they were completely immobilized before commencing their torture. The way he left the bodies of his victims, often posed in sexually suggestive or humiliating positions, was another chilling hallmark of his crimes. These patterns and signatures provided deep insights into his psyche and were crucial in understanding the full extent of his depravity. Luis Garavito's choice of victims was not random. He specifically targeted a vulnerable segment of the population, young boys who were often impoverished, homeless, or from broken homes. The boys Garavito preyed upon were typically between the ages of 6 and 16, often found in marketplaces, bus terminals, or wandering the streets. Garavito's manipulation of these children was both strategic and cruel, exploiting their desperation and trust. The impact of his crimes on the families of these victims was devastating, adding an unbearable burden to their already struggling lives. The profile of Garavito's victims underscores the tragic reality of his crimes and the urgent need for societal reforms to protect the most at-risk populations. The reign of terror that Luis Garavito unleashed on Colombia created an atmosphere of unending fear and anxiety. As news of the disappearances and murders spread, parents became increasingly protective of their children, altering daily routines and imposing strict curfews. The fear was palpable in communities across the country, particularly in poorer neighborhoods where his victims were often found. The psychological impact on the communities was profound, with children scared to go to school or play outside, and trust within communities eroded. The authorities faced immense pressure to catch Garavito, with the public demanding swift action and the police criticized for their inability to protect the children. The unending fear that Garavito instilled in society underscores the far-reaching impact of his crimes and the need for effective law enforcement and social support systems. The investigation into Luis Garavito's crimes was a long and arduous process, hampered by a lack of resources, societal complexities, and the sheer scale of his brutality. Early on, police struggled to connect the dots, with the killings spread across vast distances and occurring in different jurisdictions. Many of the victims, being street children, were not immediately reported missing, making establishing a timeline or identifying potential links difficult. Adding to the challenge was the fear that permeated the communities where Garavito operated, with people hesitant to come forward with information. Despite these obstacles, investigators pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency and a commitment to bring justice to the families of the victims. The investigation was a race against time, a desperate attempt to stop the monster before he could claim another victim. As the investigation progressed, detectives noticed chilling similarities in the murders. The victims were all young boys, often found naked or partially clothed. The cause of death was usually strangulation or stabbing with signs of torture. Bodies were posed in specific ways, indicating a ritualistic element. This pattern suggested a serial killer. Investigators shifted their focus, compiling a database of similar murders. They shared information with other departments, hoping someone might recognize the modus operandi. Forensic psychologists developed a profile of the killer. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. Certain names and locations kept resurfacing. Witnesses reported seeing a man fitting the killer's description. The killer was cunning, able to change his appearance and evade capture. The breakthrough came with the discovery of mass graves. These findings confirmed the systematic killings of dozens of children. The scale of the crimes shocked the nation, bringing urgency to the investigation. Pressure mounted on authorities to bring the perpetrator to justice. The investigation into Luis Garavito's crimes took a significant turn in February 1999. A homeless woman in Pereira made a gruesome discovery. She found a bag with personal documents, photographs, and detailed descriptions of murders. She contacted the authorities. The contents sent shockwaves through the investigation. The documents belonged to Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos. His notes matched many unsolved cases. It was the break they had been waiting for. A nationwide manhunt ensued. Garavito's face was plastered on wanted posters across the country. After months of relentless searching, authorities finally caught a break in April 1999. A patrol officer in the town of Villavicencio noticed a man matching Garavito's description lurking near a schoolyard. The officer, alerted by the nationwide manhunt and recognizing the potential danger, approached the man cautiously. The man, visibly nervous, provided a false name and claimed to have no identification. However, the officer, suspicious of the man's demeanor and recalling the specific details circulated about Garavito, decided to detain him for questioning. At the police station, the man's true identity was quickly confirmed through fingerprint analysis. Luis Garavito, Colombia's most wanted fugitive, was finally in custody. News of his capture spread like wildfire, bringing a mixture of relief and outrage across the nation. The man who had terrorized communities for years, the monster of the Andes, was finally behind bars. The capture of Garavito marked a turning point in the investigation. It brought an end to his reign of terror and offered hope for justice for the families of his victims. However, it also opened up a Pandora's box of questions and anxieties. The nation grappled with the sheer scale of his crimes, the systemic failures that allowed him to operate for so long, and the deep scars he left on Colombian society. The investigation, while officially over, had exposed uncomfortable truths about poverty, child vulnerability, and the dark side of human nature. The revelation of Luis Garavito's crimes sent shockwaves through Colombian society. The sheer scale of his brutality left an indelible mark on the nation's psyche. The case exposed deep societal issues, forcing Colombia to confront uncomfortable truths. Garavito's crimes had a profound impact on the families of the victims. Many of these families were already struggling with poverty and marginalization. The loss of a child compounded their suffering. The gruesome details of the murders added to their trauma. The lack of support highlighted the inequalities and injustices in Colombian society. Following his capture, Luis Garavito was indicted on charges related to the murder, torture, and rape of 172 boys. The sheer number of charges and the gruesome nature of the crime sent shockwaves through the legal system. Garavito's trial, held amidst tight security and intense media scrutiny, became a focal point for a nation grappling with grief and demands for justice. During the trial, Garavito confessed to the murders. His detailed descriptions of the crimes shocked even seasoned investigators. His defense attorneys argued that Garavito suffered from mental illness. However, the prosecution successfully argued that Garavito was aware of his actions. In 2000, Luis Garavito was found guilty on 138 charges. The judge sentenced Garavito to 1,853 years in prison. However, the sentence was later reduced to 40 years due to legal technicalities. The verdict and sentencing sparked mixed reactions. Many felt that the reduced sentence was a miscarriage of justice. The case fueled debates about criminal justice reform and victims' rights. Despite his imprisonment, Luis Garavito's legacy continues to cast a long shadow over Colombia. His name has become synonymous with evil, a chilling reminder of the vulnerability of children and the capacity for human cruelty. The scars of his crimes run deep, impacting not only the families and communities directly affected, but also shaping societal attitudes and responses to child protection, law enforcement, and the justice system. Garavito's case spurred significant changes in Colombian law. In response to public outrage over the initial leniency of his sentence, the Colombian Congress passed legislation in 2000 increasing the maximum prison sentence to 60 years for crimes against children. The case also led to the creation of a national sex offender registry and strengthened penalties for child sexual abuse and exploitation. However, despite these legal reforms, the fight to protect children and prevent similar tragedies continues. Garavito's crimes highlighted the need for greater societal awareness, education, and vigilance. Community-based initiatives focusing on child protection, poverty alleviation and support for at-risk youth have emerged across the country, aiming to address the systemic issues that made Garavito's crimes possible. The legacy of Luis Garavito serves as a stark reminder of the importance of safeguarding children, strengthening institutions, and confronting the darkest aspects of human nature. The fight for justice, accountability, and healing continues, driven by the memory of the victims and a commitment to creating a safer future for all children. Even with Luis Garavito behind bars, a sense of unease lingers. His case, with its horrifying details, continues to haunt Colombia and the world. It forces us to confront the darkness humans are capable of, leaving us grappling with uncomfortable questions. While his capture brought relief, it also left a void filled with unanswered questions. One of the most perplexing aspects is the sheer number of victims. How could one man commit such atrocities unnoticed? The answer lies in a confluence of factors. Garavito exploited vulnerabilities, socio-economic conditions, and systemic weaknesses. His ability to blend in allowed him to move through society undetected. He preyed on the marginalized and the forgotten. Communication breakdowns and lack of resources created the perfect storm for his reign of terror. The questions extend beyond his capture. What drove Garavito to commit such horrific acts? Was it childhood abuse, a desire for power, or psychological factors? Experts have theories, but the answer remains elusive. The human mind can harbor unimaginable darkness, and some depths may always remain unfathomable. Luis Garavito's crimes, while perpetrated by one man, stand as a chilling indictment of a society that allowed such horrors to occur. His case exposed the cracks in the system, the vulnerabilities that predators like him exploit. We must acknowledge our collective responsibility to protect the most vulnerable among us. The fight against such evil requires a multi-pronged approach. Strengthen our justice systems, invest in law enforcement training, and improve agency communication. Address child vulnerability, poverty, and lack of education. Create support systems for at-risk youth. Foster a culture of vigilance and awareness. We cannot afford to be complacent. Be the eyes and ears in our communities. Look out for signs of abuse and exploitation. The legacy of Luis Garavito should be one of action. It should serve as a catalyst for change. The fight for justice demands our unwavering commitment. Only then can we hope to prevent such horrors from happening again.